So, 35 male, and always had freaky weird things happen to me in my sleep. When I was little, between the ages of 3 and 5 years old, I had this big football that hang on the wall with hooks on it for backpacks, jackets, etc. My earliest dream memory was a repeat dream of looking down the hall and seeing this figure just standing in the front of the football. It never noticed me, but I noticed it. Next, we moved to another city in the 2nd grade, to an old house. Week 1, sleep paralysis. Definitely something holding me down to the bed. Couldn't even scream for my parents. This is actually my first time telling anyone about that. When I was about 10, 11, or 12 years old, my grandmother passed away. And no joke, this woman hated me. I couldn't stand her much either. But a few months later, after she passed, she came to me in a dream. She was black and white, while the dream was in color, and looked very, very dead. Black eyes, tattered clothes. Only thing, she had this glittery rainbow ambiance. She looked at me, told me she was okay with it, and picked up her dog. And I woke up. Next day, her asshole dog we ended up adopting vanished. Poof, gone. Months or so after that, my grandpa announced that he was getting remarried. Well, night before the wedding, sitting around the table playing 750 with dice, late at night, he had asked my dad, his son, he thought Mama would be okay with him remarrying. And I just chirped in with no thought, saying, yeah, she's happy with it. Didn't realize I had spoken until the words were already out. My time in the Navy, early adult, I kept having these dreams of people with no face, and all of them gave me this feeling that I knew them, some reoccurring. And I'd wake up, I'd have this urge to go find them. Like you lost your brother or sister and your mama makes you go find them. Gut feeling. I always felt bad because to me, they were real. They seemed to need help, but they had no face and left me with no cues. So I would always be on the lookout for feeling of these people. You know, like you could feel when someone's mad, happy, sad, but this was just their presence. 8 years, Navy, similar dream. I get out, 2012, and then demons start showing up. Had a dream that was split screen for all you gamers out there, and my grandpa, my mom's dad, was on the right, and his back, massive thing with bloody arms and smoke for legs was on the left. Big head with 3 red eyes and a triangle pattern like it was showing me something. Now he has severe dementia and probably not going to be around much longer. 2017, I actually had this dream of an actual demon had crawled out of me and was climbing the walls and destroying my house. And it was mad, evil, angry, mean, wanted to rip my body to pieces. That had shown up a couple more times, just showing me things. Horrible, terrible, terrifying things with me, my wife and daughter. Deaths, burning, torture. Too much for a dad to watch 2 to 3 times a month. Now, as 2 days ago, this dream went too far. I sometimes sleep on the couch. My daughter, 3 or 4 years old, sometimes come in and hog the bed and snuggles mama. I say, fuck it, and I crash on my big old couch. Well, this night, I had this dream of a tall, skinny, dark shadow thing holding me down and beating the ever-leaving dog shit out of me, choking me, scratching me, and it was also pissed. I felt all its hate and rage. When I woke up, I was trapped in an inhale of breath and couldn't move or let it out. Had this feeling that it was actually in the room still. I could feel it, smell it. It was there. So I got up, went outside, smoked half of a joint, mind you, this is about 2 or 3 a.m., and crashed thinking it was a nightmare. I had come back, but this time it was torturing my family, and I kept hearing the names Tom over and over again. It was diabolical in its laughter as I watched my family being tortured. Then it came back to me and I woke up in fear. Now, 2 days later, my wife sat me down asking for a divorce, just out of the blue, out of nowhere. I think I've had it out with all these dream nonsense, and I would like for it to stop. It's now 1:30 in the morning, Texas time, and here I am, 35-year-old grown-ass Navy veteran, terrified to go to sleep. Am I bonkers, or is this stuff actually happening? Now, to this day, I still cannot explain what happened this night. So it was about 11 o'clock, and I was winding down for the night. I did my normal nightly routine, which included using the restroom and leaving a light on in the bathroom. Important later. I do this so I could see better when I'm going to use a bathroom in the middle of the night. So I climbed into bed and prepared to go to sleep. Not even 3 minutes into me laying down with my eyes closed, I hear a very clear voice of a woman whisper in my ear, "I am here." At that point, I shot out of bed, but before I could do anything else, I hear footsteps walking up to my door and stop right outside of it. Now, this could have been a random noise, but what was worse is that I would see the shadow of 2 feet just standing on the other side of my door due to the light coming in from the bathroom. At this point, I could barely move from the seated position I was in my bed. After about 5 minutes, I decided to turn on my TV so I had some background noise. As the TV was powering on, I thought I started to hear the sound of someone breathing coming from under my bed. And I know it wasn't just me because I could even hear it when I held my breath. So, at this point, I was in absolute terror and could barely move from my bed. I stayed that way for about another 2 or so hours. I don't remember why exactly, but at some point I needed to get out of bed and grab something, but still occasionally was hearing the breathing from under my bed. I felt better getting up knowing that I had a knife on my bedstand and could defend myself if I needed. So, I got out of bed and decided to look underneath. I grabbed a flashlight and the knife and then looked, and to my shock, there was nothing. This cleared up a little bit of terror that I was feeling, but there were still feet on the other side of my door. So I built up the courage and opened the door, and yet again, there was nothing there. Even after clearing this up, I still did not sleep at all that night. To this day, I cannot fathom what happened on that night. I don't know how to explain it, or if there is any explanation. If any of you guys have any thoughts on what it could have been, please let me know. This happened about a month ago, and I haven't had any experiences near the same as this one. When I was 19, I spent the night at my boyfriend Jay's house. His parents were on vacation, so we decided to sleep in their room. They had a queen-size bed, which was far better than his tiny twin bed. We watched some TV, and then Jay got up to switch off the TV. As I rolled over, I caught him staring at me with the weirdest look. I asked him what was wrong, and he said it was nothing, and we went to bed. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a little ghost girl standing next to me. She had short black hair and was gray, kind of like black and white movies. I freaked out and started screaming and shaking Jay to wake up as she disappeared. When I turned back around, the little girl had reappeared, now with a flower. I still continued to scream and she disappeared again. Jay finally woke up and asked what I saw, and I told him I didn't want to talk about it, fearing she might come back if I talk about her. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, Jay asked me again what I saw, and I told him I wanted to wait until we left the house to talk about it. He looked me dead in the face and said, "Did you see the little girl with short black hair?" I froze and asked him, "How did you know?" I had never told him what I saw. Jay said when he turned off the TV the night before, he saw a little girl in the reflection of the TV. He didn't want to say anything since he knew how terrified a ghost I was. But when I started screaming, he knew what I saw. We told his parents what happened the next day and asked if they ever saw anything like that, and they hadn't. I know the ghost was friendly, but still terrifying. First paranormal experience that happened in the fall 2011 at Ball Cemetery, about 20 miles outside of Omaha, Nebraska. This was the first time I'd gone to a cemetery, but I'd heard all about its lore from the friends I was with. I was at IHOP with my friend around 12:30 a.m. or 1 a.m. He'd brought up Ball and the experiences he and the others had had there several times before. All scary stories like being scratched, bruised, and shoved. He said one girl we both knew had her eyes go completely black. May have mentioned a voice telling them to get out. I'd always been intrigued by the paranormal, but healthily skeptical. Didn't really believe in or not believe in him. We're at IHOP, he brings up Ball and asks if I want to go. I say sure, we finish our meal and head there. The road there could not have been more theatrically scary. It's pretty far out in the middle of nowhere and you just have to know where you're going. You have to turn your headlights off when you turn onto the road leading there. Whoever the caretaker of this place was, understandably, not fond of people screwing around out there, and they'd apparently had a shotgun that they were not shy about firing off, and a large dog that roamed around the property. There's no trespassing signs everywhere. It's a one-way in, one-way out type of setup. You come to a fork in the road and curve left onto a woodsy patch. The trees make this patch of road feel like a tunnel. You emerge from the tree tunnel and you're there. And it's terrifying. The road is a gravel loop. The way you come in is the way you get out. The cemetery itself has a gate. It was hanging open this night, but sometimes it's chained shut. My friend parks and I don't want to get out of the car. We bitch back and forth at each other a bit. I say I'm scared. He gets fed up with me and says, I've got a gun, I'll shoot the ghost, and demands I get out of the car. We go into the cemetery. It's very dark, but not so dark that you can't see. Silhouettes of trees and headstones are clearly visible. I grab my friend's hand and will not let go. I'm going into this situation freaked out because 1, I don't want to get caught, and 2, a lot of what haunts this place is apparently not friendly. My friend knows his way around, so I'm holding his hand and following him. We're in the middle of the cemetery and suddenly it gets really dark, like SpongeBob Advanced Darkness, not normal dark. I stopped walking because I couldn't see anything. We're just standing there. I've moved my free hand around in front of my face to see if I could see it. I couldn't. No silhouettes of anything, just pitch black. I figured my eyes were just adjusting or something. Regular dark fades back in. Silhouettes are visible again, and off in the trees, in the opposite direction of where the house on the property would be, I saw 2 circle-shaped lights, 1 orange orb and 1 blue orb. They were just moving around smoothly and silently out in the trees, weaving around. They didn't look like flashlights, but my rational brain thought maybe they are. Until they started doing this, they would never disappear, but they'd be in one spot and then just in a completely different spot. They'd just be in one place and then be in another place, all while never actually disappearing from sight. They'd be closer then far away, all while never disappearing. There was no noise. It was so quiet, if there had been somebody out there, I think they would have been making some sort of audible noise, talking, footsteps, moving around through branches and debris, etc. They did this for a while and then just disappeared. Shortly after that, we heard a dog start barking and we left quickly. When I was 7, I had my first paranormal experience. I lived in Germany at the time. I was in my room and I saw a figure that my memory has now blacked out. I was filled with a fear that was so indescribable. I fell to the floor and tried to scream, but nothing came out. I was terrified. When I was 12, I started hearing footsteps and seeing shadows. I watched a lot of paranormal content. I was generally fascinated with the other side, so one could say it was a trick of the mind. When I was 13, my mental health started going down rapidly. I had a new puppy, and one night he would just stare at something and fill me with that same fear I once felt at 7. I started to scare me and honestly piss me off because whatever it was scaring my baby. Anytime I tried to touch him after these experiences, he would jumbo terrified of everything around him. I had to stop wearing black PJs and using black blankets because he would jump at the color black at night. He was fine during the day for the most part. It's safe to say sleeping was very hard after this. In 8th grade, a lot happened to me because of my mental health to worsen. Overall, I became a perfect target for a dark entity. I started sensing something everywhere I went, feeling taps, hearing my name being called. I did my best to ignore it, as I knew giving it attention would only make it worse. I was home alone all day. My mom worked and attended school, so she got home around 11 p.m. I would start seeing 2 different shadow figures watching me sleep. Because I was scared, I turned the hallway light on before I went to bed, then closed the door. I would see small feet shadows at the bottom of the door and a large shadow at the top. My mom's closet has always scared me. I slept in her room at this time. I would see a shadow figure watching me, so I started opening the bathroom door to block the closet. Unfortunately, the door didn't block the whole closet, and I would see the figures peering over the door at me. I would just roll over to the other side and convince myself I wasn't scared, trying not to feed the spirits with what it wanted. Unfortunately, it wasn't my fear it was feeding on, it was my depression. When I was 14, I moved again. I'm a military brat and moved often. I could tell the spirits followed me. I still felt the taps, heard my name being called, but I was used to it at this point. My depression was at one of its worst points. I had no friends, as I moved right before COVID happened. I would see shadows going up and down the hallways and more things not worth talking about. My dog's still experiencing what happens at night. One night, I was alone because my dog was scared of my room. I started to get a feeling that I wasn't alone. When I felt my leg get pulled, I froze before I pulled my leg back. I was frozen in fear. I would have left my room and slept somewhere else, but I didn't feel safe anywhere. It would just follow me. I started screaming at it to leave me alone, to leave my dog alone, telling whatever it was that it wasn't welcome here. After I started doing that, it would get better and then worse, and I'd have to do it again. I would also draw protection symbols on myself. Right before my 16th birthday, I went to a psych ward. I got the help I needed and became overall so much happier. I kept telling the entity that it wasn't welcome, and eventually, as I got happier, it all stopped. I'm turning 17 in a few days, and I have been safe ever since. I don't feel taps or hear voices. I truly believe that me not being depressed have the entities no reason to stick around since I stopped being scared of it altogether. Around 15 and a half years. My life has been so much better ever since then, and I truly grateful that I was able to protect myself on my own. I know this isn't the best storytelling, but I hope it made sense, because this was a very real thing for me, and I still think about it to this day. What I just experienced is going to be hard for me to overlook. I'm not trying to be rational no more. You guys win, ghosts are real. Twice now I've had weird experiences in the same place, my grandma's attic. Once a couple of years ago, and just 5 minutes ago for the second time. Let me start with a prequel. To give you an idea, my grandma has a house, and the attic is basically like the second floor over the whole house. It's filled with all sorts of things we dumped up there that we don't need. Tools, firewood, old toys from childhood, etc. Also up there is a short chair and coffee table. When I take them out of the attic to the balcony, it's my favorite place to smoke in the house. Tobacco, not weed. I like the view and the wind. Sometimes, though, I'm lazy to bring them out, and I smoke in the attic, looking around at all the junk. One day I was going to go up there, when as soon as I stepped foot on the first stair, I got a fight or flight response for seemingly no reason. It was in the middle of the day. I've been in the attic 1,000 times, and I'm not scared of it. I'm not a kid, but for some reason, I was getting chills and my heart was beating fast. As soon as I went up to the last step, I stopped and looked around the attic. I had nothing to be afraid of, but it's just the instinct. I couldn't go into the attic without checking it out first. I spent like 30 seconds just looking into the attic in silence before the courage came back to me to walk forward. While walking towards the table, for some reason I had the thought, what if demons watching me right now, and that's why I've had the bad feeling? I instantly laughed it off and thought to myself, let him show himself. I'll show him who's boss. As soon as I finished that thought, I heard a loud shuffle, like someone's footsteps dragged on the ground. I instantly froze midway and just looked in the direction where it came from. I spent at least a minute just looking, frozen, expecting a big-ass rat or something to pop out from somewhere over there. When I finally got my courage back again, as soon as I was about to continue to the table and finally do what I came for, another loud noise froze me. This time, a distorted piano playing. I kid you not, the most demonic, out-of-tune chord you could imagine. Like a sound of a horror movie producer would put in on a jump scare. On cue, of course, immediately I dashed towards the stairs and noped the fuck on out of there. I went downstairs, entered the room my family was in, and tried my best to pretend that I wasn't just running from a demon. My mother heard the piano and she thought I found my childhood toys and was fooling around with them. I went with that story and told her that surprisingly the batteries were still holding out. They must be good. I wasn't about to tell my family I seriously thought there's a demon in the attic. After I spent a couple of minutes downstairs regaining my composure, I started to think about things rationally again. I felt ashamed that I got scared of nothing. I'm an adult, damn it. I picked up my small balls and went up there again, determined to find that piano and ease my mind forever. Went up, immediately walked up to the place where the sound came from, and picked up off the wall a big garbage bag full of toys from my childhood. I started taking things out and found it, a cheap Chinese dingy toy piano. Tried pressing the keys, no sound. Flipped it around, opened the battery compartment, and it had a brain fart when I saw there are no batteries in that thing. I took it down with me, found some batteries, put them in, and tried playing it. Still, no sound. Unfortunately, it failed to ease my mind. So over the next couple of weeks, I spent quite a lot of time, thinking of that incident. As time went on, I started rationalizing it more and more, thinking that maybe pianos like that just make their final sound when the circuit board finally dies, kind of like parting words. Maybe the shuffle I heard was from my own feet, but because of the fear, it sounded like it was someone else's. The only thing that I couldn't make sense of is how the piano that had been in the garbage bag for about 15 years found the energy without batteries to make a sound out of its speakers. And a loud one at that. I even posted here at one point hoping someone could ease my mind and offer an explanation. In the end, as time went on, I brushed it off and told myself, I'm no engineer, I don't know how currents work and shit. There could have been some weird way that happened, it was just normal, and it was just a coincidence. I went to the attic countless times after that, and nothing ever happened. No weird sounds, no unexplained paranoia, just peace and quiet, as it should be. Well, right until today, recently, we've been doing construction work on the house every weekend. I go up to the attic about 20 times a day to fetch something or to have a smoke break. We finished the work and went to bed. Now, before you accuse me of being a skeptic rationalizer, I try to keep an open mind. Recently, I've been getting into trying out art style projections. It's a nice little meditation, and I haven't succeeded yet, but the effects are quite trippy and it's fun. So I'm laying in bed, browsing the AP subreddit, and before I decide I'm gonna go up there and smoke one last cigarette before I go to sleep. The front door is loud, and I don't smoke in the house, so I go to the attic. In the same exact way, as soon as I step foot on the first stair, I get the immense feeling of something is amiss. Now, some years have passed since that last time this happened, and naturally, my small balls have grown at least a little bit. So it didn't stop me this time. I just went up, sat on my smoke table, lit my cigarette, and remembered the last time this happened in the piano. Like any sane person, I started a monologue in my head to banish the potential ghosts. My monologue continued until my cigarette went out. Here's a recreation. I don't know if there's a demon up here or whatnot, but you can't spook my ass. I can't touch you right now, but I'm learning this technique that lets me come into your house. Trust me, tonight I'm coming and killing your dumb ass. As revenge for what you scared me, etc., etc. Now is your last chance to try to scare me away. Try me, bitch. And I put my cigarette out, quietly amused of my little monologue. And here we go again. As soon as I finish my monologue and say, try me, a loud sound as something on my left drags across the floor. This time, I caught it with my peripheral as I turned around. A sack filled with dry sticks for the fireplace was moving across the floor, defying the laws of physics. Gravity can't do that, can't make it move that distance, especially when there's so much friction that it made a loud sound. It's also not heavy in weight, like a couple 100 grams, so it can't slide like that or even cause that friction unless someone's pushing on top of it. I shot up and stayed fixated on the sack, convinced not to let a rat, for example, run away without me seeing it. It didn't move for a couple seconds, so I went up to it, took all the sticks out, and checked every corner of that thing. No rats inside. I put the sticks back in and said out loud, "Don't touch that again." I said my piece already, and I meant it. If there really was an evil entity up there, I'm not going to banish it. If there really is an evil entity up there, I'm going to banish it. Although at this point, I was starting to feel like I'm bluffing, LOL. I walk up the stairs, but before I went down, I stopped and looked back at the attic. Although my knees were weak, arms heavy, vomit on my sweater already, I wasn't going to give in to my fear, so I stared into the void for a couple of seconds to establish my dominance. And again, as if a reply, the sack lightly got dragged, so this time a little bit. For a split second. I spent a couple more seconds looking at it and then slowly went down the stairs with a confident walk, shaking a little. Originally, I was going to go to bed, but the adrenaline got a little high, so now I'm sitting on the toilet, writing this, maybe with a ghost proofreading over my shoulder. Sorry to make this so long. I tried my best to write it in an entertaining manner. The seemingly uneventful experience I found just too powerful. I don't think I can ever rationalize this. It's just too many things on top of each other. The strong fight or flight I get before the event, the timing that makes this feel like a reply, the hard to explain sound and movement. I know there's a lot of skeptics browsing this sub, but still I'd appreciate some guesses as to what could have happened. I am now a believer and I can't over-rationalize things by myself anymore. I don't know if this spirit could be good or bad, so I won't take any extra measures right now. So please don't reply with "throw salt on it" or anything like that, LOL. Unless I wake up with a cigarette burn on my cheek and come asking for help with how to banish a demon, LOL. My husband and I live in a ranch-style home. The woman that previously owned the house with her husband was killed in a car crash. We lived here a couple of years with nothing, then started noticing an unexplained perfume smell in one of our guest rooms. I chalked it up to being an old spill or such, but the room has been completely remodeled and the smell comes and goes. My mother was placed in that room during her hospice in fall 2018, and my father-in-law was also there for his hospice in spring 2019. Both passed in that room. My mother was ready to be with her Lord and Savior while my father-in-law fought death and was so very scared until the end. Since we continue to have the perfume smell, which can now be smelled in both guest rooms, I have seen a smallish figure walk across the hallway from bedroom to bathroom. We have seen multiple shadow figures, etc. A couple days ago, I was home alone and walked next door to take our neighbor's dinner. Then, garbage the mail from the box. As I came in the door, I was sorting the mail and made it to the counter and set the mail down before I realized I heard someone talking from down the hall. As soon as I registered and I looked up, the talking stopped. Due to the past trauma, I'm an extremely vigilant person, but I didn't realize until a couple hours later that I never checked the house for an intruder. Totally not like me at all. It was like I normalized the voice and didn't feel threatened. As a side note, all the windows were closed and no tech was playing. I am interested in hearing your thoughts, TIA. I honestly can't say I know exactly the feeling people get when they have to walk through a section of a building you never really felt comfortable walking through, as if all eyes turn to you, even though alone, no matter what time of the day, and how you're feeling never subsides no matter how many times you walk through it. That was truly creepy, but I never felt that anywhere at this new house. Anyway, this one minor experience brought more questions and really no answers as to what I saw. It was about our third day moving from a couple of towns away to our new home. We are just 4 in our family, although we had my uncle and aunt over helping us as being 9 years old. I just wanted to play. My aunt and uncle were with my mother out in the front yard, my brother near me standing pretty much in the doorway next to me. Just another ordinary move day at the house. About to grab more until I remember, I look down the hallway, and weirdly, I see someone peek their head around the corner, what would be my parents' room. I was oddly curious as the way they were peeking was like you do when you hide behind a corner of a wall and just peer your head enough to see, like hide and seek. I looked at the face, but oddly, you could not make out any noticeable features. Just seemed blurry, but obviously someone's face peeking around to the closet. As a kid, you aren't really aware of what can and can't be possible at certain times. For instance, even all these years later, the distance of the hallway, I for sure would have been able to make out at least some semblance as to who it was. The face, as featureless as it was, I thought at that time was my father just having fun. Now it was so long ago I could not remember if I went to check or not, as I do not recall myself walking down the hallway. I only looked again when they disappeared and asked my brother, "Wait, who was doing that?" He was busy looking elsewhere and gave no notice and simply responded, "What was what?" I told him, "I think I saw Dad hiding." He didn't even care as he continued talking to me and said something that hinted everyone was outside. I said, "Yeah, right, I just saw Dad in the room. He's hiding from us." He kind of laughed if I was joking. I weirdly had no desire to check, as if it was my father. I figured he's hiding something he doesn't want us to know. He did own a handgun. Then, just as I just ignored my father, I heard my aunt and mother coming, followed by my uncle, then my father. I knew at 9 it would have been impossible for my dad to do a peek and make it to the back door, visible from where I was and nowhere near the closet area. It was a weird feeling to come to the conclusion that who I saw was not anyone from my family. It's been a good house to us and never had any bad feelings or vibes. The only other thing I could think of is our home from which we were moving had had a death in it. The previous tenant had passed away in my parents' bedroom, but they never told us, understandably, until we moved out of the house. My mother had mentioned once in the past that our old home, as she was blow-drying her hair after she put me in my crib to sleep, she came out to the horror of finding me literally inches from the edge of the bed. I I was months old at the time, so I have no recollection, of course, but my mother said it scared her greatly as I was still asleep. I didn't fuss, cry, or make any noise as I somehow got out of the crib either. My mother took it more as a sign to watch us closer, I guess. If the older tenant was still there and meant harm, we didn't feel it. My mother just watched my brother as much and I much closer. He's only 18 months older, so it could not have been him moving me. The only reason I bring this up is perhaps the older lady was making sure we were okay in our new home. My dad couldn't. How would he have gotten out without being seen if he was by the closet, as you would need to walk back into the side of the hallway to use the back sliding door, and then the other back door was closer to my brother and I at the time. Not to mention, from the time I seen the face to when I seen my father couldn't have been more than 45 to 60 seconds. One event in my life I still question to this day. I know what I saw, but who it was I have no idea. The only reason it stands out as paranormal to me is the face features, or lack thereof. I should have been able to make out something as the distance, 25 feet or so, for it to be as blurry as it was. With great eyesight, it's near impossible in my mind. No weird house history to my knowledge either. Anyone else have something similar happen to them? From Miss Mojo Raisin. Back in September, I saw 2 different spirits in my boyfriend's house, but I only told him about one, and now I think the other is messing with his family because they weren't prepared for it. The first one I saw was most certainly an angel. It was tall, faceless, paper white figure with a pair of huge wings that wrapped around its body. And I saw it standing at the top of the staircase like it was watching over everyone. It was vivid, and I stared at it for a pretty long time. But then when I blinked, it was gone. I told my boyfriend about it, and he was happy to hear it. The second was just about a week later. It was just as, if not more vivid, but much more threatening. It was a shadowy figure that looked like the black silhouette of a ballerina standing on point, almost completely featureless, except it had glowing red eyes. It was standing near where I'd seen the angel, but slightly further down the hall, outside one of my boyfriend's sister's room. It gave off a horrible, angry energy, and in a weird way, it gave off the impression that it was judging me based on my femininity, or therefore lack of. Like it was disgusted with me for being less womanly than I would like. Same as the angel, I looked at it for a while, but it was gone when I blinked. I wanted to tell my boyfriend, but whenever I tell him about previous negative supernatural experiences, or just make jokes about anything other than good spirits, it makes him really uncomfortable. And having seen the angel just a few days prior, I figured his family was protected, so I didn't bring it up. But now, 2 nights ago, I found out that his oldest sister had been having sleep nightmares and sleep paralysis for weeks now, and seeing a dark figure outside her room, the same place I saw the ballerina. I don't know for certain that it's the same figure I saw. I haven't asked details. But given where she's been seeing it and the fact that the spirit was definitely associating itself with femininity and his sister is the one being targeted, it feels like more than a coincidence. I thought that of all people, she'd be safest because she's more classically feminine, at least compared to me. But now that I think about it, it's probably exactly why it's going after her in the first place. My boyfriend says he's going to do a cleansing of the house soon, so I'm sure he'll be fine, but I can't help but to feel like if I told him about it sooner, then it could have been dealt with before his sister was affected. So this was a few years ago, but I thought I'd share because to this day it's one of the scariest things that's ever happened to me. Basically, a few years ago my sister lived in this house share. It was a huge house, 3 stories with 5 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. At the time my sister was the only one living there, so all the other rooms were vacant. My sister's bedroom was on the ground floor next to the kitchen. One night, I was staying there with her. She'd gone to bed a couple hours ago, and I was suffering with insomnia at the time, so as I was in the kitchen, talking on the phone with a friend, it was about 3 a.m. While I was on the phone, I got this horrible, overwhelming feeling of being watched. It was like something, not someone, was in the room with me, and whenever it did not want me there. I tried to ignore it and continue my conversation for a few minutes, but it got to a point where I was straight up just did not feel safe in that room. So I told my friend I was going to bed, and I hung up the phone. I went into my sister's room, and she always told me to lock the door behind me, even when there was nobody else in the house. It was just a standard lock, and that had just been turned, so I did it and grabbed my blanket and lay on the floor to sleep. I'd only been lay there for a few minutes when I heard the sound of the lock clicking and the door creaking open, and suddenly that feeling of dread was back. It took me a minute, but I finally built up the courage to turn around and check, and the door was wide open. While I was staring at the door, I couldn't see anything, but I could literally feel this thing watching me, so I just froze. I finally managed to reach my hand out and shake my sister awake, and she had to get up and close the door and lock it because I physically could not move out of fear. If done correctly, caving isn't overly dangerous. Make sure you have supplies, know where you're going, and don't get into tight spots you're not 100% sure you could get out of. I was interested in getting into the hobby because I live in an area with a number of good available caves and a community surrounding the hobby. I wasn't ready to sink money into climbing gear just yet. I wanted to explore some easy caves to start with. I was chatting with an online group trying to get a trip arranged when Gary contacted me. His friends were going to a hidden cave just for a walk around and wanted to know if I was interested in joining him. Gary was well known to be an all-around good guy in my small town, so I jumped at the chance. He warned the entrance was a bit of a walk into the woods and I should make sure I had plenty of supplies. When I arrived to our meeting spot the next weekend, Gary introduced me to everyone. Ross, Jill, and Brad all arrived with him. Vaguely, I know who they are, all before he told me their names. When you live in a small town, you just know everyone, one way or another. I could trust going into a hidden cave with them. No serial killer vibes from them at all. We shook hands, and within 5 minutes, we're walking into the forest. We talked like old friends. So Gary, does this super secret cave have a name? I asked him while he was walking. Oh, right, I didn't really tell you much, have I? The cave is actually a section of an old filler mine. I knew the name of filler, even if I never heard about there being a mine in these woods. It took me a few seconds to put the name to a face. Filler, like old man Filler outside the town, the one who everyone thinks is crazy? Be nice, he's a harmless old man, but yes, his family owned the mine before it shut down, Gary explained. It might be the only person who didn't know anything about the cave we were headed towards. The mine caved in because of a dumb reason, right? Jill piped up, like they were mining the walls the wrong way or something. They were mining the support pillars. After Gary spoke, we all started to roast the miners of the past for mining into what kept the roof over their heads. We went on for a few minutes before Gary got us to settle down. The cave-in killed a lot of people inside. I'd never found the entrance because people just cover it all up trying to forget it ever happened. I haven't even been able to figure out what they were even mining for, so little information remains about the mine. I did find an old unfinished map of some sections. This mine was long at some points, and I mean long, and they just kept going down. I asked my grandmother about Filler Mine, and she only said, "They dug their way straight down to hell," Brad said, making his point sound as ominous as he could. We all had a small laugh at his remark. I was amazed to find out about this. After living there my entire life, I never heard even the slightest mention of the mining around these parts, past or present. My new hobby was already teaching me some things. I was excited to see the old mine had in store, but Gary had to dampen my high spirits a little. Like I said, this is a small portion of it. I thought it was a good starting area. It could be a bit of a walk, and it only has one turn before the dead end. The ceiling gets a little low for that turn, and you have to crawl to get through, but not tight enough to get stuck. With all that being said, just because this cave has been safe in the past doesn't mean it will always be safe. Be careful inside, and don't go off on your own. And Gary started to list a bunch of safety rules I already knew. They really didn't need repeating, but I was glad that he cared enough about our safety to remind us. After being reminded wouldn't hurt either. It gave us something to hear while we were walking to the location. After about an hour of trudging along the woods, Gary stopped us. I'd expect like a cave opening in a cliff or a hill, something along those lines. The hole in the ground wasn't what I thought we would be crawling into. Dirt and loose stones created a ramp large enough for us to talk down into the pillars comfortably. Gary was double-checking his lights, putting on his helmet, when I saw something under his jacket I didn't know before was there. I was certain he was wearing a holster on his belt. That suddenly made me uncomfortable. Guns weren't uncommon, and it was legal to have one hidden away like that. I just didn't know why he'd be bringing it along. "Gary, are you armed?" I asked slowly and a bit nervous. Oh, right, I'm sorry, I didn't tell you. I've been out here with one of these 3 before, and they're fine with it, so I didn't even think to say anything. It has a safety on, and I'm really serious about never using it unless it's a life-threatening or death situation, he explained calmly. We ran into some really sketchy guys the last time we were out. Some of them parked trailers out here for weird drug operations. Gary decided to start bringing his gun just in case, Ross added. I nodded, understanding the reason behind it. So far, they haven't murdered me, so I feel like I was in the clear and should be safe with them. For the short time I've known him, Gary felt like a very responsible and prepared person. If I was with anyone else, I would have ditched them the moment I knew I was going into a hidden mine with a stranger who could draw a weapon on me at any moment. Gary won me over fully when he handed out some peanut butter cookies, so good. I would gladly follow strangers into the wood forest. After he made us all have a snack and drink some water, he started down the dirt ramp into the darkness below. Ross took up the rear. Jill and I held hands to carefully make our way down. Gary ready at the bottom in case one of us tripped. Brad soon joined us. Ross nearly fell over because his backpack was so heavy, but he saved himself at the last second. "Hey, if this place was so hard to find information about, how did you know the mine belonged to the Filler family?" I asked. I turned on my flashlight and started to look around the area. It was wide enough for us to walk back into the day, plenty of space to work. The cream-colored walls glittered very faintly in my dim beam, and I wondered what type of rock it was. I stumbled onto this opening and found an old helmet inside. Gary said, and Brad scoffed. "I found an opening. I went back for supplies, and you just went inside without me." I stayed in the light. It was perfectly safe anyway. The helmet had property of Filler Mine Company, and I took it up to the old Filler place, and he told me about the mine. He didn't know any parts were still open and warned me about the normal dangers of cave-ins. He told me I had a kind soul, so he thought I wouldn't be in danger inside the mine. Our small group made more mocking sounds. The old man was a bit off, but also harmless. He was the resident crazy and an easy target. Gary might be the only person in our town who would listen to anything Filler had to say. He didn't believe anything of the wires and stuff the old man said. Still, he was kind enough to at least to listen. Once again, we got quiet down as Gary went over the rules as if we had never heard them before. If he could get away with it, I thought he might want us to form a line holding hands so we wouldn't get lost in one way. Soon we started to walk along as a slow pace ticking everything in. Once we stepped away from the natural light, everything started to look a bit creepy in our flashlight beams. The mine was untouched for years. It was a good spot for animals to live, but we saw no signs of life. No bats, no rodents. Not even any bugs were inside the musty darkness. Winds blew through the opening and we left, making it sound like the walls were whispering around us. I stopped to feel the large bolt sticking out of the wall, and I don't know anything about mining, and I wasn't sure what it was there for. On the ceiling were remains of hooks that might have held some old lanterns. No, that might not be right. I've always heard these dangers of gas inside the mine, so why would they use fire lanterns? If they didn't want, did they use the lights before light bulbs were invented? I should research mines if I remembered to do so. The group was leaving me behind, so I started to pick up the pace and go after them. The only other living thing inside the mine I'd seen were some patches of mushroom, or fungus. I'm still not sure of the difference between the two, or if there even is one. I didn't even notice them at first because they were blended into the wall so well. They were the same color and looked like pebbles in a bunch, all bunched up together. The texture even looked rocky and rough. I didn't dare touch them with my bare skin, so I just nudged them with my boot to see if they were real mushrooms or some weird-looking rocks. The others spoke about things I wasn't very interested in. From my first cave trip, I thought this was going very well, until we got to the bend after a while of walking in a straight line. Gary stopped in front of us and took off his backpack and adjusted to his head through the small tunnel where we came up on. The dead end is on the other side of this. The last time I was here, a small hole opened up as far as I could tell. There was another area beyond the wall. I asked Ross to come along and stick the cameras through to see if we could find anything interesting. Ross gave us a little wave, and I understood why his bag was so heavy. He could use a small camera, but I assumed he brought a bunch of equipment to see what was on the other side in real time. I'll go first. Since you and Jill have never been through yet, you can go after me. Brad and Ross will stay behind just in case you start freaking out. It's not that tight, but it goes on for longer than you would expect. Gary was already down low, ready to go through the small opening in front of us. My plan was to see if I could crawl on my hands and knees. Hunching over while walking might hurt after a while. When he disappeared through, I gave him a head start and went after him. Jill wasn't eager to go, so I jumped ahead of her. The rocks dug into my knees, even though my jeans were somewhat protecting me. I needed to hunch through. It hurt my back like I thought it would, but at least I wasn't shredding my knees and my palms. I never had an issue with enclosed spaces or dark. Gary kept telling us comforting facts about how it wasn't very tight and I wouldn't get stuck with still having my pack on my back. It was dusty and I wasn't adjusted to moving my body in that position. Still, I should have made it through without any problems. To this day, I don't know what happened to me inside that small little tunnel in the dark. My light flickered out. I wasn't worried. Gary was on the other side, and he would have a spare. I just needed to keep moving forward. Then, I felt something brush against my arm. I jerked it back, knocking my elbow against the wall. I cursed, and fear spread through my body when I didn't hear my voice. I spoke again, only to have no words come out. No, I was speaking, I just wasn't hearing it. How had I suddenly gone deaf in that tunnel? I kept trying to speak, getting more and more freaked out by each passing second. But I kept moving forward, but in the dark I couldn't tell how fast or how far I was going. I felt something else brush against my fingertips, and I shook them, trying to get whatever it was away from me, only to have that feeling keep happening no matter how I moved in that small space. It felt like threads were brushing against my skin. I felt the panic at the idea of going through a spider web. Gary had just been through here. He should have cleared the path, He should have cleared the path through the webs if that was even the case. I was choking out small, frightened sounds even if I couldn't hear them. The last thing I wanted was to be covered in spiders in the dark. Gary was right about this tunnel being longer than I expected. I felt like I was already hunched over for an hour. My thigh muscles throbbed, and I switched to crawling on my knees and refused to stop. Slowly, a rumbling sound came to my ears. At first, I was glad to be hearing something again, but as soon as I became outright frantic, thinking that rumbling sign was a cave-in, I needed to get out of here. My knees became torn and bloody from scrambling over sharp rocks. My arms bumped against the wall and my pack scraped against the ceiling. Soon I was on the verge of hyperventilating and beyond any kind of rational thought. Tears stung my eyes, making them sore and gritty from the dust in the tunnel. When I thought I couldn't get any more frightened, I felt a cold hand wrapped around my ankle that felt off. It felt like, for a lack of better words, squishy. I let out a scream, pushing through, bursting out of the tunnel into a large enclosed area. I kept going, pressing my pack against the far wall, tears streaming down my face. In my state, I didn't even notice Gary or what he was looking at. I just stared at the tunnel opening, waiting for whatever was in there to come out for me. When nothing did, I finally looked down to see how badly I'd hurt myself, only to see nothing. My knees weren't dirty, but not at all cut up and bleeding like they had been inside the tunnel. It just didn't make any sense. I felt all those things, all the cuts and scrapes in my elbow against the wall. I should be bleeding, but I was fine. I looked over at Gary, scared and confused, waiting for answers. There was a powerful flashlight illuminating the space. In the light, I saw his face and my stomach sank to the floor. I followed his gaze to look at what made him so pale and sweating in fear. Against, on the other wall, was a body. At one point, it had been a person, a man maybe. He was dead and had been dead for a long time. His skin shriveled and rotted. It didn't smell, so that was a small blessing. Seeing a dead man in the back of a cave would usually unsettle anyone, but he wasn't just dead. He was covered in the same fungus I'd seen through the cave. The faintly glittering caps grew out in bunches. Only half of the dead man's face was exposed. I lost the battle with my stomach and threw up those cookies I'd eaten earlier beside myself. The man somehow still had his eyes, white and blind in death. "It's Old Man Filler," Gary said in a small voice. I almost didn't hear him. Gary could recognize that shriveled and dead face. I could barely handle seeing this man without knowing who it was. Gary was holding himself together pretty well. He looked at me, his eyes wide when he realized that more people were coming into the small space. Darting to the tunnel, he got down to the opening just as Jill poked her head out. He shielded her sight from the body against the wall. I heard soft voices of them talking, but my mind wasn't able to process what was going on. Looking at the dead man covered in mushrooms made my arms itchy. I was rubbing and scratching at them when Jill came out and turned away before she saw the state Old Man Filler was in. She couldn't really turn around in the tunnel, but with Brad and Ross behind her, Gary decided to let them come through to go back inside of trying to turn in a small space. He warned Jill in time so she didn't see the body. Ross and Brad couldn't help themselves. They had to look. Their reactions were just similar to mine. Ross nearly fainted, and Brad started to retch off to the side of the small room. "Jesus, what did he die of?" Brad asked in a hoarse voice. "I don't know," Gary admitted. Brad really didn't care about how the man died. He was just talking for the sake of talking. All of us were in shock and didn't know how to handle our discovery. "Ross, you know the way back to the car, right? Can you go and call the sheriff down here?" Gary asked, collecting himself enough to be in charge again. "I can, but I don't think I could fit through the tunnel," Ross answered back. "No, he can't, but Deputy Tully could." Ross nodded, understanding. Someone died and we needed the police over here. No matter how much we wanted to believe this was a prank, we needed to take it seriously. The thought came to me wondering why Gary was sending Ross. Surely we were all going to get help. "I'm going to stay here with Mr. Filler," Gary said. "He's dead. It's not like he's going anywhere," Brad answered, and Jill made a small whimper from where she was. It sounded cold and harsh, but it was just the facts. "I know. I can't leave him here. He died alone and has been here for who knows how long." It doesn't feel right to leave him in the dark again. Gary was a good guy, even if I didn't think it before. I thought that now. He looked terrified, staying alone with the body. Still, he would stay for the sake of the dead no matter how scared he felt. I started to rub my arms again while considering staying with him. The shock of the body made me forget my freak out inside the tunnel, and I did not want to go back inside. The only other option was to stay in the spot next to the fungus-riddled dead guy. I choose the tunnel. This first cave was going to be the death of my hobby before it even started. All right, we'll be back soon. Do you have a spare flashlight? Mine died in the tunnel. I asked, knowing Gary was prepared enough to have a spare. He nodded, digging in his bag to give me one. We let Jill go first through the tunnel, trying to get her out of there the fastest. She looked paler and sicker than the rest of us, even though she hadn't really seen the body yet. Brad followed after her, then Ross, giving Gary one last look. I also give Gary a long look, delaying going back inside the tunnel. The second time through didn't have much trouble. My flashlight stayed on, and I didn't see the spider webs or fibers I felt the first time. The three of us jogged, almost ran, the uneven floor back to the entrance. Ross falling behind with his heavy pack and Jill tripping a few times. Once we got to the slope, we scrambled up. Ross left his pack behind him and made a run for the car. I was in such a state of shock I didn't even think about using my cell phone. I just sat there on the mossy ground and waited. Over an hour passed, and the sheriff and Deputy Tilly arrived, being guided by Ross. From the look of their faces, they didn't believe any of this. I heard Ross explain what he had found in the surrounding, like he had already went over it before. The sheriff was a larger man, so he stayed outside with us. As Tilly went inside, Ross regretfully guided him that far as well. I waited, watching Jill pace, looked ready to be sick. Outside the tunnel, the forest sounded so normal and peaceful. One would never guess that there was a dead man underground waiting to be found. I lost track of time when Ross and Tilly came up, but where was Gary? Ross looked paler than he had been when he found the corpse, while Tilly looked confused. "They're gone," Ross explained in a croaky voice. "What do you mean?" I asked, equally as hoarse. When the two arrived inside the dead-end space, they found Gary's pack spilled over and nothing else. No body of Old Man Filler and no Gary. That was impossible. They couldn't go further inside the mine, and the only exit was the one Jill and I watched the entire time. The next few hours were a mess of confusion. The sheriff was convinced we were playing some sort of prank on him. Tilly believed something was going on, and somehow all of us convinced him Gary was with us that day, but then he thought we had something to do with him and used his odd story as a cover-up. He wanted to bring us in and had nothing to really go on. Dejected, we were all released to go home, but we were warned not to leave town until things got sorted out. When I arrived home, I was so tired I kicked off my boots and flopped into bed. I slept for 10 hours, only waking up when my arm was itchy. The news about Gary being missing already spread around the town by the next day. I wanted to go out there and look for him, but I came down with a bad flu the moment I got home from the cave. My entire body shook from the chills, no matter how many sweaters and blankets I piled on. I could eat just fine, but felt as if I couldn't get enough food in my stomach. For days, I was in that state, too weak and feverish to do anything. I finally got enough strength to take a long shower. Rubbing my arms, I felt it, a bump on my left forearm. Turning it into the light, I saw a pale mass that made me feel sick. I nearly fainted seeing it. Against my better judgment, I poked it, trying to feel if it was hard or soft. I gagged as my skin parted for something I recognized to sprout out through the skin, a mushroom cap. My entire body crawled under the hot water. Frantically, I grabbed at it and pulled it out of my arm, tossing it aside. In a feverish hazy, I dug into the skin, pulling out massive mushroom as blood started to pour out of the mix with the hot water. I kept going for what felt like hours. I felt my vision start to fade and prickle. Unable to stop myself, I fainted in the shower. I live alone, so there was no one to check on me. I woke up hot and confused and remembered the mushrooms in my arm and let out a scream, looking at it to see nothing. A scar I didn't recognize, but no bumps or mushroom caps. I still checked over my entire body several times, feeling faint before I turned off the water and went to bed. I still didn't shake off my fever. My entire body shook from chills and my joints ached. I woke up in the middle of the night, moonlight pouring into my room. I wanted nothing more than to pull the blankets over my head and close out the world. Against my own will, my body moved. Slowly, I made my way to the window, feeling an urge stronger than I ever felt in my life to look outside. What I saw made me want to scream, but my body refused to listen to me. Gary was outside staring up at me, glittering mushrooms growing out of one side of his face. His sandy brown hair blew in the wind as he remained expressionless. One eye white, one eye blind, but the other still fully blue. He wanted me to go outside and meet him. I could feel it. My blood was on fire. As it pumped, it felt wrong, like it was thicker than normal, as if something else were inside it, traveling through my veins. I stared down at the person I quickly considered as a friend in a daze. My body wanted to go outside to wherever he was going, but my mind refused. We stayed like that in a standstill as the moon moved over the sky. The next thing I was aware of was waking up in bed. I gasped, darting up, looking around to see nothing unusual in my room. I went over weakly to the window, expecting to see Gary still, but I didn't even see any signs of someone walking through the grass. I wanted to believe it was a dream, but from the guilt of leaving him behind. My illness was just guilt, and that scratching feeling inside my body wasn't what I thought it was. I still have dreams that Gary waits for me outside my window. I don't get out of bed, but I know he's there. I could feel him standing outside. I could hear thousands of soft voices begging me to just go outside, to go back to the mine. I don't know how much time I have left until I give in. One day, I will give in into those whispering voices and scratching inside my blood. Until I do go back inside that old mine, I regret ever going inside. The next time you're going to explore a cave, please be careful and make sure you know everything about it. And please never go inside the filler mine if you ever come across it. If you do come inside, despite all the warnings, then, if you can, find us.